welcome to tonight's lecture, and thank you very much to all of you for turning up on such a horrible night. We are absolutely delighted tonight to have two speakers who are going to tell us about a real-life, very important conservation project going on right here in Oxfordshire. So it's lovely to have that opportunity to hear about this Mink Eradication waterfowl recovery project, which is going on the River Thame, run by the River Thame Conservation Trust. And our two speakers are Hilary Phillips, who's the Senior Project Officer for the programme, and it works particularly with the Trust to try and, well, to develop the project, to bring volunteers on board, and she will tell you much more about what she does. And Grace, who is now the Managing Project Officer. Both of them are qualified ecologists, very experienced in different aspects of ecology, as I'm sure you'll hear as well, because it's not just about the mammals, the mink and the waterfowls, it's about all the other aspects of biodiversity and habitat creation and promotion on the River Thame. And, but also it's great because quite a few of our members have been volunteering on this project. So I think without any further ado, I shall hand over to Hilary and Grace to tell us about this very important project on our doorstep.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for a lovely turnout tonight. So, and thank you for the lovely introduction. I'll stop tripping over my words in a minute. So, as you can see from the introduction of the project, this is all about mink control, first off, but I wanted to also tell you about the River Thame Conservation Trust, because there may be several of you in the room who don't know about us, never heard of us, don't know what we do. I'm going to just introduce the project first of all and how it was set up, why we wanted to do it, and the collaborations that have led to it and the flooding. And then Grace is going to talk about how the project was delivered, and with the help of volunteers in this room, and talk about some of the issues around it. Halfway through, you're going to have a quiz to make sure you're all awake still, and then we'll look at the next steps for the project. So, River Thame Conservation Trust, we're one of a National Rivers Trust group. We operate, there will be a map up showing you where our catchment is. We're a catchment partnership. We work with all sorts of different projects. We're not just sort of working with volunteers, we work with farmers. We look at fish passage up the rivers, water quality, biodiversity, creating wetlands and restoring floodplains. We work with citizen scientists. We regard part of the work that we've been doing with the volunteers here, helping train in footprint ID, getting them access to sites they might not be able to go to see things that they might not otherwise be able to. We work with volunteers on improving river habitat, come out and help us put berms in to create better habitat along the sides of rivers, and clear rubbish out of, not clear rubbish out, but clear other invasive non-native species out of rivers such as Himalayan balsam, things like that. And we've got various water quality monitoring projects that volunteers are involved with as well, and all this helps to look after the health of the rivers and the many riparian creatures that rely on the rivers to navigate the catchment. So, why were we looking at waterfowls? I think probably many of you know that there's a big issue with waterfowl nationally. We've got some of the statistics up here that sort of setting out the losses that they've had on a national scale for many years. We're particularly bereft of waterfowl in the Thame catchment. I think our last record, confirmed record, was 2006. There have been some introduction attempts, which we'll touch on in a minute. But yeah, this was really highlighting the issues around mink in the catchment. Research shows that existing waterfowl populations can be restored many times. So their numbers can be hugely increased by having restoring bankside vegetation, getting the right bankside management in place, and protecting the habitats they need. But on top of that, mink predation can really have a huge impact. Even if you get the habitat right, if you've still got mink in the catchment, they're going to really struggle. So we need to take a two-pronged approach looking forward. As I say, the last reports were 2006. This is some of the history of the water vole in the catchment, and some of that sort of information there you can see from 2001, the Wendover arm of the Grand Union Canal, which is right over towards Tring, Wendover Way. That had a really good water vole population, more than 120 water voles, one of the best bits. The Grand Union Canal doesn't really look like a canal, if any of you know it. It's actually a much more naturalised, and it's classified as a chalk stream by the Environment Agency. So in a very short period of time, that population was wiped out by mink predation. Grace will tell you a little bit more about mink in a little bit. Oh, that came on to me now, didn't it? So in 2006, Wild Crew, who are the wildlife conservation arm of the Oxford University, did 2 water vole reintroductions, one at Cuddesdon and one at Chisleham, not very far away from each other in the Thame. These failed. They were monitored for a few years. Mink were controlled in the area, but they still failed. And we think that was just the pressure of the wider population of mink in the catchment, which hasn't been controlled for many years. So landscape control mink is obviously a key part of actually recovering water vole in our catchment before we can move forward with reintroduction of water vole. If it's decided that that's a good thing to do, we first off need to protect and enhance the neighbouring populations and improve the habitat surrounding those populations to see if we can get them to expand into areas further up in the Thame. First thing to do with that is to control the mink. Now, in the past, that's been very problematic. It's a very labour-intensive thing to control mink. You've got to have your rafts out there to see if you... First of all, the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust methodology for controlling mink was to get your rafts out with clay pads in, which we'll see later, to see if you've got mink in the area. If you've got mink in the area, you then put a live trap out. Those live traps had to be monitored at least twice a day, because if you caught a mink or any other creature in it, because it might not just be mink, it had to be trapped, it had to be checked so that there was not undue stress on that animal. But in recent years, there's been a big step up in the technology surrounding mink traps, in that we've now got remote alarms that will help reduce the amount of monitoring that's needed. And this has been really showcased through the Water Life Recovery Trust's work up in the Norfolk area, where you can see the green area is their core operation area, and the buffer is where they're moving out. And over several years, they have really used the remote alarms and traps, and they think they've more or less eradicated mink from that area. And that's been a really good case study for other organisations around the country to set up more mink control and hopefully mink eradication projects. Hesitate to call it eradication, because even if you think you've caught the last one, you're still going to have to keep monitoring to control that they're not coming from somewhere else. There's bound to be little pockets somewhere. So that really gave us a good boost to think, yeah, this is feasible. And then Natural England had a little pot of funding that we could apply to as a trust to do species recovery work. Obviously, the species that we want to recover is water vole, but in order to do that, we had to have a programme of mink control. BBOUT have been very active in the area for many years, but their water vole recovery project, which covers 3 counties of Berkshire, Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire. The Thame catchment is part of Oxfordshire and part of Buckinghamshire, tiny bit of Hertfordshire. They've only been able to concentrate on the areas where there are water vole records, so they can protect those water vole and they can trap the mink in that area. But anywhere where there was no longer water vole, they didn't have the resources to keep trapping. Hence the big black hole in the Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire Thame catchment area, which you'll see on the map in a minute. So we joined forces with BBOUT to do a sort of appendix, if you like, to the water vole monitoring project that they have is a Joining the Dots mink control project. So, quick look at what a mink is before we go on to showing you the map. So you can see from that the second one down, polecat, bottom one mink, similar sizes, but mink's obviously much more aquatic, riparian mammal. They can eradicate a whole colony of water vole in a very quick period of time. It's not the only prey that they will go for. They're fairly catholic in their taste, but they're small enough to fit down burrows, water vole burrows, kingfisher holes, all sorts of things. And they'll go into farms and they'll take birds, they'll take eggs, they'll take, as you saw in the first one, that was a waterfowl, a big waterfowl, still managed to get it. So they're fierce predators. The only defence that a waterfoal's really got is swimming down a hole or thrashing up a bit of dirt in its trail to try and stop whatever's chasing it, actually see where it's going, and that's not very effective against the mink. So as well as issues around the habitat quality, which sort of touched on very, very briefly a minute ago, and we'll talk about it a bit more further along, the mink have been a huge issue for the water vole. So before we can do any water vole reintroduction or get them to expand into our catchment, we need to get rid of the mink. So we applied for funding in partnership with BBOUT, and we are working in, this is the Thame catchment, you can see the boundaries. All these brown blobs that you can see are part of the Thame catchment farm cluster. So that's another part of the work that we do, is work with farmers. We support many farmers across the catchment in many ways, but this is a cluster of farmers who all want to come together to work more regeneratively, restore nature alongside good farming practices that will protect the soil and the water resources of the county. So we've got an audience here who are interested in restoring nature, very connected to the river, and really good partners in this project. So again, alongside the renewed technology, the up-to-date technology of remote monitoring that enables much better response, much more engagement with volunteers not having to go out twice a day or more to monitor minks. We've got good engagement here with the farmers. We've got an existing knowledge of what the water vole population is through BBOUT's work. What we didn't know is what mink we've got, really. So the next steps were to start monitoring the mink and seeing what we've got and seeing if we can eradicate them from our catchment, because we're fairly confident they were there. So set up the project with BBOUT, and then Grace has taken this on, and she's been managing it for more or less the last year. So I'm going to hand over to Grace now, and she can tell you all about the day-to-day running of it.
Yeah, so hello, I'm Grace. So as Hilary said, we are partnered with BBOUT, working together on the Joining the Dots project, funded by the Natural England from their Species Recovery Fund. It's an 18-month fund. It started at the end of 2023, so we are now coming to the end of the funding period. We are aware we need to keep this project going, as Hilary said. We need to control mink long term if we want to see a positive effect on the water vole. And BBOUT have their pre-existing water vole recovery project that's been running, I think, since 1998, where they've been monitoring and controlling mink for all those years. And this Joining the Dots project means that we can go in and we can fill in those gaps and create a scheme that covers the Thame catchment as well, and the rest of Berks and Oxfordshire that wasn't already covered where water vole existed. So this is a map of so where we are in the Thame catchment up here in the pink dots. So that's us in the Joining the Dots project, and the purple dots are BBOUT's rafts as well from the Joining the Dots, and the yellow are where they have the existing rafts and monitoring efforts. So you can see how from this Natural England Fund we've really covered those gaps and spread out to more of the main watercourses. And as part of Joining the Dots, we've got 159 rafts out in total. 45 of those are in the Thame catchment, so with our volunteers, and the rest are with Beebout. And we've also caught 80 mink since last May across just those purple and pink dots, and 38 of those were us, or 42 of those were us in the Thame catchment. So in a very small area, we have controlled quite a large population already within the first year. So we've made a really good start, and across the two schemes, we've got 366 rafts out on the water, either in monitoring or in trapping mode, which is brilliant. So how have we done it? So we have three models of engagement that we sort of identified at the beginning of the project, and that kind of came about naturally as we began to engage with our landowners. Firstly, we have landowners who are working on their own land to control mink. Either they were already doing it, or they just didn't want to have volunteers involved, and they had the time to do it. Secondly, we've got volunteers working with landowners, so a collaborative approach where often the volunteers will help with the monitoring, and when we go into trapping mode, the landowners will do the dispatch. A lot of our farmers already do pest control and things, so it's just easier to do it that way. And then thirdly, we've got volunteers working alone, so the landowner's given permission for us to deploy a raft, but they haven't got time to be involved, so our volunteers are then allowed to go and do the dispatch and monitoring on their land. So initially, we had, at the very beginning of the project, we reached out to our volunteer network. As Hilary said earlier, we've got other projects like our water quality monitoring, where we have a huge amount of volunteers on board. So we were able to reach out to a lot of volunteers. And initially we had 20 sign up and about 8 landowners, but these were the farmers that didn't have time to do the control themselves or do the monitoring themselves. So what we did was we ran a very large training session, and I allocated all those volunteers to the different farms, and everyone was grouped and they were trained in those groups, so they could sort of meet the team and learn how to assemble the rafts, where to deploy them, all the risks, the health and safety involved, how to dispatch, how the remote alarms worked, and we also ran through the prints and ID. So yeah, it was a sort of a whole day event where we ran through everything. And afterwards we set up lots of WhatsApp groups where the different teams could then communicate with each other, and that helps to make sure that everyone can communicate when they're going to check the rafts, when they need to go into trapping mode, to let the landowner know that they're going to be coming onto the land. And we also have a bigger WhatsApp group where all of our volunteers can send photographs of prints that they're seeing and communicate with each other. And yeah, lots of nice videos of different wildlife get sent in there as well. So it's a nice little space for everyone. And over the last year, we've continued to identify landowners, but I've been doing the training on a more ad hoc basis. At the beginning we had this big group of volunteers ready, and then I've just been, as and when, I've just been training them up. And the same with landowners. So now, after 18 months, we've got 28 volunteers on board and 33 landowners, which I think is quite a good start. We have got quite a few gaps still remaining, but without the support of all those volunteers, we couldn't do this project. I'm not on the project full time. We have lots of other projects going on within the trust, so to have that many people able to go out there for us and to help with the control of mink it's brilliant. Particularly the volunteers that can go and work on the landowners' land who don't have time to do the project but would like to see mink numbers reduce. So what are the rafts? The rafts they're made up of a relatively large base, and they have a tunnel on top with a hole in the middle where you can pop a clay pad. That's basically a basket with a bit of foam or wool, and then you put clay on top. You put that in the middle of the raft, and that sits flush on the water, and it keeps the clay nice and wet. And then you can monitor for mink prints, wildlife prints as well. So you pop these rafts on the edge of the bank, tether it with some rope, and then you leave it there and wait for mink or other wildlife. And then you go back and repeatedly check it after 10 days, every 14 days. We are slowly adopting the Wildlife Recovery Trust's methods where they don't do any of the monitoring. So their rafts, they haven't got a hole in the middle of them. You just go straight out into trapping mode. We know that there are mink in our catchment, so it is probably a more effective way of doing it. But it is nice for us to be able to monitor for other wildlife and see what's out there. And also when we are putting rafts in public spaces, we would tend to do the monitoring rather than trapping, because you can still see what wildlife's there and if there are mink in the area, but we don't really want to be trapping in a public reserve. Yeah. So yeah, that's a clearer photograph of what the clay pad looks like, and that goes into the middle. And yeah, as you can see, it's not just mink prints that we get evidence of otters. I think we've had lots of different animals. We've had stoats and weasels, rats, lots of small mammals, and our volunteers, they scour the banks as well when they're going to check the rafts. So it's not just very specifically the clay pad, they look everywhere, and that all gets recorded onto something called Mink Map, which I'll tell you more about in a minute. But yeah, when you go and check these rafts, you look at what prints there are, and then you just wipe it clean once you've recorded everything that's there, and then you've got a fresh clay pad to look next time. Now it's time for the quiz. So you've got a series of photographs in front of you that have been recorded from this project, thanks to Paul. I don't know where he is. Somewhere. So yeah, if you'd like to just take a few minutes to see if you can identify what they are, I appreciate it. I'll go through them now. The first one, we're now debating what it is. So number one, we thought this was brown rat. However, there's a chance it's water vole. Yeah, but the reason that we don't think it was is because of, so far we haven't got any evidence of water vole in the catchment, but it's quite exciting that it is. So, is that a consensus there that you think it's water vole?
It's water vole. I was the water vole project officer for Wildlife Trust.
Yeah.
The Mink Eradication project, if you like.
Yeah.
I was obviously the project officer for 15 years. And I helped because any conservancy developed the rafts.
Yeah.
We did the first large-scale trapping of mink in the southwest and Somerset levels with bats.
Oh, amazing. Well, I think.
And you think it's water vole?
So we now need to track down exactly where that photo is,
Yeah.
where it's from.
You sent it right at the beginning of the project,
Yeah.
wherever it was.
Yeah. My laptop's dead at the moment, so I'd have it on now, tracking where.
That's very exciting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And Bob, you
Yeah.
thought it was water vole as well, didn't
yeah,
you?
you did. Didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is, I mean, just coming here and speaking to you tonight has given us a new impetus to do more
But
surveys.
it also highlights how it can be very difficult to identify prints, particularly if you're not out there every single day looking at them. And we haven't seen any evidence of water vole. So I've not seen any signs of water vole for about 5 years. So I'm out of practice.
But we usually look for other field signs as well, don't we?
Yeah. Okay, number 2, badger. That's quite a nice and clear print. Yeah, you do still get badgers walking in and around. So number 3 is a mink, probably a female or young mink hind print. Number 4, also mink. And I think there's another one coming.
There's a track.
Yeah, there's a track coming the other way. And number 5, you've got the otter print, but you've also got the small print of a mink next to it, if you can see that. And then,
On that one, the minks.
yeah. And it's quite a nice otter print, that. And then number 6 is the fox, as well as woodmouth. very, very small. But yeah. So well done if you got any of those right.
Anybody get them all right? I expect quite a few people did. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I bet you did.
This is why we thought we're not going to bother with prizes with this audience.
Yes. But yeah, so that kind of takes us on quite nicely to trapping and baiting. So when we've done the monitoring, once you find the mink prints, then we begin trapping. As I said before, we are shifting away from the monitoring at all, and we have started going out into trapping mode, particularly where we've got farmers who don't want to do the monitoring. It does work quite nicely to get them on board immediately. And all of the traps we have, as Hilary was mentioning earlier, they're all smart traps, or smart rafts, sorry. So we have the remotely alarm units that sit on the back of the trap. A magnet goes to the side, and we string it with fishing wire to the door. And so when the pedal is triggered, the magnet flies off, and that sends an email to whoever is in charge of dispatching at that trap. I also get all of the emails to make sure that I can communicate with whoever's doing it and make sure they're responding within the right amount of time. But I also get all the error messages. So sometimes it's technology, so it's not perfect, and they don't always work brilliantly. So I get those alerts as well, which means I can go out and help the landowners or the volunteers to either fix them, replace them, have a little look. Sometimes the batteries just need wiggling around. But yeah, if it wasn't for these alarms, we would have to check the traps legally once a day, but ideally more than once. Whereas with these units, you can leave them until you get a notification. Ideally, you check them every now and then. Easy to do if it's on your own land, but it's always good to make sure that nothing's gone wrong with them. But yeah, it means that we can trap, when we are in trapping mode, we can trap near constantly, whereas before you would need somebody there every single day, which is very onerous and quite difficult to get volunteers to do that all the time. So yeah, the only times that we stop trapping any of these rafts is when a flood is due, or when any bad weather is forecast, any storm alerts. I ask all the volunteers and landowners to shut the traps down because they're live traps. We don't ever want to have an animal in there that we can't then get to either dispatch or release when we can't access the raft. As well as if the dispatcher is going away, then if they're going anywhere overnight, I ask them to shut down the trap again, so that if it goes off at 12 at night, then they can respond in the morning because they're there. So the only times that we shut those traps down. Oh, and very quickly, we do also bait them. We add lure into these traps, particularly when we know that there's mink in the area, but we're not getting any activity in the traps. And Bebout's method is we use cigarette filters that are soaked in a secretion from the mink, and then you put that in the back of the trap, and it attracts mink. And in some cases have worked very, very well, where we've not had any activity in a trap for weeks and weeks, put the lure into the back of the raft, and the next day caught one, and then 2 days later caught another one. So that in that location it worked very well. It's not always that effective, but so far it's been pretty good. And the other good thing about using our live traps is that if we have any bycatch, we can make sure to release it. So for example, if there were a water vole in the area and they go into the trap, we can release them, and that's the same for any wildlife that we get that can fit into it. All of our traps do have otter guards on them, so even a juvenile otter can't get in them. But anything smaller that could fit through that gap can get in there, so we want to be able to release them. And this is a good example of why we might want to release. You don't want to be catching anyone's pets. But yeah, thank you, Paul, for the video. This is actually one of our newly deployed rafts. But so far, we haven't had any bycatch in any of our traps, apart from one squirrel, but they're also invasive non-native, so that was dispatched as well. And yes, so I mentioned earlier that we record all of our data on something called Mink Map, and that was developed by Meryl Gelling. And this has allowed us to create a private project on the app where we add all of our rafts to all of the different locations, which you can see in those black dots. And each time a volunteer goes out to check the clay pad, to monitor it, to look at the prints in and around it, to dispatch of a mink, or even to respond to maybe a false alarm on the traps. All of that information goes into the mink map. You can add photographs. You can see that you can record all sorts of different things on there. And if you have something that's not on the list, you can add to other, and you can type in a bit more detail. And that all goes into the one database, which is easily accessible, and it's easy to then download that data. But many trusts and wildlife trusts are using this app as well. So all of that information is being pulled into one space, which is ideal. And since we started the project, we've got a few wildlife cameras out there as part of the project, as well as some of our volunteers take out their own camera traps just to record what's out there, because everyone's quite interested. So we get all sorts of videos of otters, of deer, of badgers, ducklings. So it's another nice way of recording data in that area. And again, anything from that gets recorded onto the Mink map as well. So what have we achieved so far? So we had 65 rafts as part of the partnership with BBOW as part of the Joining the Dots project. Now, there's the River Thame is 65 kilometres long, plus its tributaries. Ideally, we would put them every kilometre, but we have to be opportunistic with where our landowners are, who wants to be involved and who doesn't, because many people don't want to be involved, which is fair enough. We've got 20 more rafts left to deploy, and hopefully in the future we will get even more so that we can cover more of the catchment. And we have captured 42 mink in 2 hotspot areas. Hopefully this works. Yeah, so it's quite interesting. So the map before, you can see the red dots are where we have our rafts. The orange is where either I'm about to deploy or the landowner is agreeable and we're in the discussions. So we are starting to bridge those gaps that we've got, particularly north of the catchment. And you can see the 2 hotspot areas we've got so far are in Waddesdon and the Little Milton, Great Milton, Chiselhampton, Southampton area. You can't really see it, but in the very middle in Tame we have had 1 mink. But otherwise, of those 42, most of them are in those two different areas. So it'll be interesting to see, now that we have all of these traps out. Last year we had to deal with a lot of flooding and things, so it was quite a slow start to the project. Now we already have all of these out. As the breeding season begins, we will hopefully see many more mink being captured. So naturally there's been a lot of challenges associated with the project. As I just said, flooding is probably the biggest one. The Tame has been in flood a lot of last year, and already quite a bit at the beginning of this year. And as I said, if we're in trapping mode, we don't want any of those traps open while there's a flood, so we have to close those down. I think last year the Tame was in flood for 5 or so months in total at the beginning of the year, and then obviously the winter flooding that we had in September and October. So that really does hinder our efforts. And even when they're on monitoring, if we can't get to them, they just sit there waiting to be monitored. So that, it's a bit frustrating. But luckily, whenever it does recede, everyone goes back out there, resets the traps, and it's all fine. The remotey, the alarms, although they're brilliant, they do error, and that's quite a lot of my time to go out and fix them, which is probably just more frustrating than anything. But also annoying for the landowner or the volunteer who's relying on the technology, and if they're having to respond, time after time to these errors, it's just much more onerous, isn't it? Then also finding dispatch volunteers, as you can imagine, is pretty difficult. Luckily, a lot of our landowners are happy to dispatch on their land, but otherwise we only have a handful of volunteer dispatchers, a few of which cover a large amount of traps, a couple in this room. So yes, it's quite difficult to find. Landowner outreach, that's quite tricky. Obviously, we have our Tame catchment farm cluster, which was brilliant. And from those, we do get their neighbour contacts, and that's really, really great. But it has been quite difficult over the last year to keep trying to find different people to reach out to and getting people on board with the project. But it has meant that we've connected with quite a few new landowners in areas of the catchment that we didn't have any landowner connection with. Some of them have joined our cluster as well, so it's been a lot of effort, but very positive. Public spaces, we don't want to be trapping in the public spaces. Be About do. We haven't yet gone down that route. If we can avoid it, we will. But I've got a few rafts going out in Aylesbury, which you can't really avoid the public space there. So we're going to start with the monitoring and see how that goes. And then managing volunteer engagement. So we have a huge group of volunteers, all really interested in the project. But as soon as those rafts go into trapping mode, then the monitors don't have as much to do, and they don't get to go out to the rafts as often. Trying to make sure that the volunteers who want to be engaged still are has been quite tricky, and definitely lots of learning on our part of how we can do that. And then lastly, the continuation of funding. It's not an easy thing to fund this project. We will keep the project going, but yeah, we just need to keep looking for the different opportunities that we can. And sort of to finish off, we did ask our volunteers for some feedback. So why they joined the project, and in a moment what they enjoyed about the project. And it's just quite nice to hear back from people. So many of our volunteers joined because they've got a passion for nature, they love the environment and want to do something to help. Interest in river conservation, learning about the local ecosystems, an interest in the wildlife in their local areas. So many people who live in the catchment have seen water vole decline. So to work and try and help water vole. Being part of a coordinated effort to eradicate mink, engaging in citizen science, and meeting like-minded people. And what have people enjoyed about the project? Observing wildlife in the area, plenty of it, and I think once you have the opportunity to go out, particularly into lots of farmland as well, you get to see more than you do if you're just walking in reserves and things, like public areas. Building relationships with farmers, conservationists and other volunteers, gaining hands-on experience in monitoring, tracking, feeling a sense of achievement by making an impact on species recovery, discovering new wildlife, and seeing the landscape change throughout seasons whilst monitoring. I will now pass back to Hilary to talk about mink control at the landscape scale and what's next.
Right, yeah. So this is just about the final slide. So really just wanted to talk about how this fits in to the bigger picture, what we're doing on the Thame. This map, you won't be able to read there, there's very sort of wormy-looking blobs wiggling across Oxford. Those are the results of they're called the local key areas. They're part of the National Water Vole Monitoring Project, which I think every 5 years or so publishes the latest surveys. It's published by the Hampshire Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. End of December 2024, they did their latest results, and you can see that a lot of the a lot of the which is this catchment here, has got water vole, and a lot of the Thame doesn't. So the local key areas and the national key areas are pretty much these little rings that have got there and there and there. They're alert areas where there may be the odd sighting of water vole in the last 10 years, but it's not really been confirmed, and it's not a population that, it's so isolated from other populations, and it's such a small population, it's very vulnerable to sort of stochastic or other influences. Things that, if the mink in the area, in the Thame go for them, there's not much chance they'll rebound from that. Populations down here, they might be able to lose 1 or 2 water vole from their colonies, and it wouldn't wipe them out. In the Thame, if there's a few there or a few there, they'd be wiped out probably pretty much. So what's this talking to? We have got the Thame farmers, there's also a Knock farm cluster, and we've got, at the moment, we're sort of 8-9 months into a 2-year development project in partnership, the Ock and the Thame farm clusters in partnership with Freshwater Habitats Trust and ourselves, looking to landscape scale. It's called Landscape Restoration. It's one of the DEFRA projects which are taking over the higher level stewardship options. There's been, you might have heard of some of the others in round 1 who started a couple of years ago. We were successful in getting through to round 2. We're focusing on freshwater networks, so bringing together our sort of river interests with Freshwater Habitats Trust, ponds interests, and looking at holding water in the landscape. Bringing together public funds, which would be sort of stewardship schemes, and other ones with private funds, which might be people holding sort of corporate organisations, paying farmers to hold water in the landscape. We're working to look at where interventions to help nature and farmers can be done at a strategic level, whether it's for water bowl or some of our other strategic maps that we're deploying as part of this project, looking at curlews, ground nesting, waders, and we're also looking at sort of where wet woodland might be more appropriate, as well as the great crested newts with Newt Conservation Partnership. So this opens up lots of opportunities to join up, to buffer, really protects the existing waterfowl populations, these key populations, and then expand them. You can see where, this is outside the catchment, but you can see here where we've got farmers in the landscape signed up to the Landscape Recovery Project. They're committed to this project. They had to really sign documents before we started trying to develop it to show their commitment. So we'll be able to sort of help guide where it's most appropriate enhancements for waterfowl habitat with these farmers. Look at where we can possibly extend, if we do some surveys, you know, around here or where that first print was. I think we're going to have to do a few surveys this summer. Where the first print was possibly down this area. Could it, you know, link up? Can we make good habitat and get it to link? And it seems quite a long way, but we might certainly be able to expand some of these other areas to improve the habitat and keep on controlling the mink. And we're joined by the Thame. The Thames comes down the middle here. The Thame flows down here and runs into the Ock. So it's all a very joined up landscape. So having that sort of joint waterfowl recovery and mink control in over this whole area, I think is what we're looking at for the future. After the first 2 years of development, these farmers will be signed up for 20 or 30 years of delivering landscape improvements. So the more we can get signed up for that, and part of that will be mink control as well as habitat enhancements, the more hope there is that we'll be able to spread these populations up and down the catchment. Relocation, translocation, are we thinking about that? Meryl's currently involved, I believe, I don't know if I should say this, but there are new translocation guidelines under review at the moment, and so we're not going to jump any guns until we've seen those guidelines, seen how that fits in with our waterfowl strategy, and the results that we've come up with at the end of our mink control projects and also the waterfowl farmer developments in this area. But yeah, there may be opportunities for translocation where we can sort of is close enough to existing populations to make use of that meta population. It's not stranded in the middle. There'd be no point introducing something up here where there's no neighbouring populations to spread into. So that's kind of the long-term plan. Anything else? I think that was it really. So we've got a bit of time for questions if anybody's got any questions that we can help with. Yes. Have we been able to make any estimates of the population of the mink currently? No, have we, Grace?
No, we're not at that point yet. I don't think
it hasn't been surveyed enough, the Thame catchment, for us to really get a handle on where there are mink and where there aren't. And because at the moment we're just going really, we're focused, started off on the main river, as we spread up the tributaries, we may find more hotspots. At the moment, we've identified 2 major hotspots. There may be others that run into those. But yeah, it's going to take a few years to get a really good handle on that, by which time we might have eradicated them. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just thinking, if you want to get an idea of where the mink are, you can do bridge text, very much like the National Water Survey that's done every 7 to 10 to 12 years, depending when it is. And then in the weekend, if you have a number of volunteers, you could go out and just literally check all the bridges in the area.
Oh, yeah.
And you could get a very quick snapshot of where the mink are.
Yeah.
And from that, you could potentially start talking about, a mink's range is 1 to 2 kilometres, so
Yeah.
you get an idea of that. So that's just
Okay.
a suggestion.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. Bridge text.
And have you thought about engaging angling groups?
Yes, so we do have some good connections with some of our anglers, and that's how we've started spreading out into different landowners' land, particularly where there's the fishing pegs that go through some of those lands. So we've managed to get access like that. They're all obviously very on board with mink control. But yeah, we definitely have a few more angling clubs in the catchment that we could be reaching out to. So yeah.
In relation to riverine bank improvement and so on, is there an issue with signal crayfish? Do they upset or make it more difficult to restore the banks for water voles?
Well, so I just need to repeat the question in case people didn't hear it. It was about whether the effect that signal crayfish have on the riverbanks makes it more difficult to restore for water vole. As I understand it, the signal crayfish like quite steep banks that they can tunnel into. The water vole would probably be in more gently sloping banks. Some of the habitat improvements that we would make would be to maybe reprofile some of the banks, restore the vegetation, cut back trees so you've got more vegetation growing on those banks. Also, you would want to make sure that they were fenced if there was a lot of cattle in the area so that the banks don't collapse. So water voles, mink, otters. Mink and otters will eat the crayfish. The extra holes in the bank may make them more friable. I don't know if anybody else has any comments on how water vole and crayfish cohabit, but I think if you improve the habitat of the riverbank so that it's much more vegetated and providing that good cover that the water vole need for habitat and for foraging, then it's not going to be the same sort of bank that the crayfish tend to burrow in. Okay. Questions?
You've made it just one animal against one other animal, and it's I find it particularly, I wondered whether, for instance, on the Ark, where you said there are some water balls, aren't there any mink? There must be not mink there. If they're in the taming block, there must be in the Ark as well. And I just wonder, you're obviously demonising the mink completely. That's the nasty one.
Well, no, it's just.
It's a beautiful animal, and I realise that you might think that too, but just made me feel a bit sort of, no, I think it's quite as simple as that.
No, it's not as simple as the mink against the water vole. There are lots of other species interactions involved here, and the mink is a beautiful animal, and we hate having to control it, but it's the wrong species in the wrong place, and it's upset the ecosystem in such a way that it's in danger of eradicating the water vole, which is there will be mink on the Ark. The Beebout's water vole project monitors the water vole on the Ark, and where there are water vole across the Ark, they're also monitoring for mink. So there is mink monitoring going alongside the water vole monitoring. So we know that there are mink around the area where the water vole are as well, but they're being controlled. What wasn't being controlled was the areas where there were no water vole, like the Thame hasn't had water vole recorded for many years. So there was no funding to resource the amount of work that it takes to actually find out where the mink are and control them. Does that answer your question in any way? We could talk about kingfishers and the way that the mink also predate them, and there's a large number of species that mink have an impact on. So, yeah.
You described the mink, the watervole, as a keystone species. Could you say a bit more about in what ways do the presence of watervole affect other wildlife?
Yeah. If you think of them as tiny little beavers, which might seem a bit odd, but you think they're grazing the habitat where their colony is. They graze up and down the banks. They help to create little bare patches where new seeds can grow. They help the diversity of riparian plants in that area. There's been work that shows that their tunnelling into the banks helps with nutrient transfer. They are quite big, chunky animals when they're thriving. They're also a good resource for predators higher up the chain. But yes, it's really their work along the bankside vegetation. But if anyone else has anything to add to that, I know there's a lot of experts in the room that might know more. But that's how they can, their presence can really help botanical and invertebrates and other species move in and occupy an area that weren't able to before.
I could say so. It's more they're an indicator species, and if you have plenty of waterfalls there, and it shows you that the habitat is correct, it's the flagship species do that. So great crested newts are protected. This means that a lot of ponds are protected, which helps dragonflies and frogs and toads, smooth newts, palmate newts. Whereas it's mainly great crested newts, but they're a flagship species. That means there's a vast amount of biodiversity improvements because of that. So the otter is another example because it's one of the top predators. So if you get otters back, then you've got quite a good riparian habitat. In the same way, if the waterfalls are there, then the actual micro habitat of the bankside vegetation is much better because they indicate that because they're there. And I would say mink really did cause the decline in waterfalls. Waterfalls would still be doing very well in this country if it wasn't for mink, because mink can fit down the waterfall burrows. So as was alluded to, they have certain methods of escape and predation, which the mink, particularly the female, because she's smaller, will actually fit down the burrows and they the way the mink can swim and they can fit down the burrows. And when you've got 6 to 10 kids to feed, then the mink will go back out and eat what's easiest available. And watervole are that. And also, if you've got more hens on the river, then you haven't got mink or not in certain numbers. Because more hens are the first thing you notice. But the waterfall, because they don't move very far, they tend to get killed off first.
But when you've got that good habitat and you've got waterfall there, they help to maintain.
They do, yes, because I've walked along a lot of rivers looking at the bank to try and find waterfall signs, and you can tell straight away if there's dense vegetation right down to the soil. Basically, you haven't got waterfalls there because there's nothing clearing it. Where you've got waterfalls, you've got like little tunnels through there, and it's a bit like coppicing a woodland. So rather than having a single standard woodland, you actually have these small areas and glades and stuff like that, and coppice woodland, so you get really growth. And it's a way of managing in the same way that the beavers manage the rivers, and they're now coming back and saving the taxpayers £7 million according to the latest press release, and doing something in 2 days that would have taken them 6 years.
Any more questions? Yes, Alison.
Can I just ask a question of the audience? How many people here are involved in the project?
Thank you very much.
Paul and Paul.
Well, if anybody else wants to get involved,
Yeah, we'd love to have you on board.
If anyone wants to know anything more about the volunteering aspect of it, you can talk to anyone.
Well, I'm hoping we need probably an all-in-one ratings.
No, we're all right. Just wait until we get to most of you.
We have had people going out in canoes to retrieve some of the rafts, haven't we? To
Yes,
check
we
them.
did have one farmer when it flooded, came down very quickly, and he did go out and get the one that couldn't be accessed on his kayak. Is that you? What you put? Oh, sorry. Yes, you got another question.
Hi, thank you for the talk. That was very insightful. I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but I was just wondering, when you catch an American mink, does it get caught?
So can you repeat that?
Particular process you need to follow to make sure it's clean.
Okay, so if it gets caught, then have there been any, I guess, backlash to it, or whether those people would be suggesting ways of relocation from him?
All right. So I think the question is if we, when we catch an American mink, are they called? And has there been a backlash against that activity or alternatives? Yeah.
I mean, so I think that it's a difficult thing to do. It's one of those necessary evils that, you know, we are the reason that we have mink in our environment. So we have got to release them. So far, as part of our project, we haven't had any backlash. But we don't. Well, we do. We talk about it on our.
Yes, I mean, there are an invasive non-native species that is listed as one you're not allowed to re-release it.
Yeah.
We wouldn't want to relocate it because it's just going to move the issue somewhere else. So they have to be killed or called. And there are guidelines that are followed. The people, the dispatchers are the ones that are licensed. They have to have a gun license and they have to have insurance. It's all very carefully controlled the way it's done. And it's done as humanely as possible. But yes, they are dispatched, as would be any other invasive non-native that is trapped in the trap. So, does that answer your question? Okay, good.
On that cheerful note, thank you very, very much, Hilary and Grace. I think it was a really informative and really amazing talk. So could we have one last round of